Hello, I'm Sensei Alex Kikuyo. The title of today's talk is Eating Meat and Drinking Alcohol. Before we get into that, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way you'll be notified when I post talks in the future. If you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, that'd be great too. There are two topics that if you really want to get people riled up in a Buddhist community, you bring these up, and it always creates a lot of discussion. One is whether Buddhists can or should eat meat, that is, consume the flesh of dead animals. And two, whether or not Buddhists can or should consume alcoholic beverages. Now, because these are such sensitive topics, naturally I want to dive right in. But before we do, I want to point out that my training has been primarily done in the Zen and Pure Land Buddhist traditions, which fall under the Mahayana Buddhist umbrella. So my perspective will come from that, and I will be primarily quoting Mahayana Buddhist scriptures. Thus, the teaching may differ from something you find in the Vajrayana or the Theravadan Buddhist traditions, which is fine. We don't all need to agree on everything. But very simply, I'll start off by letting you know what my view is, and that is that we should abstain both from eating meat and drinking alcohol. And to understand why I say this, we first need to understand how the Buddhist ethical framework is built. Now, in Buddhism, we don't have a creator deity, so we don't go in for a deontological view of morality. That is, we don't follow the rules simply because they're the rules or simply because someone told us we should. Whether our ethics are more virtue and utilitarian based. Virtue ethics meaning that we try to align our actions with virtues we want to cultivate within ourselves. And utilitarian meaning we try to align our actions with ways that will end suffering for the greatest number of sentient beings possible. So what does this have to do with the consumption of meat? Well, if we look at the Brahmajala Sutra, also known as the Mahayana Vinaya, we are told that Buddhists should abstain from the consumption of animals because it cuts off the seed of compassion. In other words, as Buddhists, we want to cultivate compassion for all sentient beings within ourselves. And it's very hard to say we are compassionate towards a cow, let's say, if we chop it up into little pieces and throw it into our freezer for dinner. In order to exercise our compassion for as many sentient beings as possible, we abstain from eating them, instead choosing to eat non-sentient living things, that is, living things that do not have a brain or a nervous system, that are incapable of suffering, like fruits and vegetables. In addition to that, if we look at the Lankavatara Sutra, we are told that we should abstain from eating animals because in our previous lives, they were our family. They were our aunts and uncles, they were our brothers and sisters, and they showed us great kindness in our previous lives. As a result, out of gratitude for this kindness and out of the wisdom, the wise understanding of reincarnation and rebirth, we choose to not eat them in this life, in the hopes that maybe in the next life, if they have a choice to eat us, let's say they're the human and we're the cow, they'll show us the same kindness and gratitude and respect. So there we have a virtue ethic. We also have a utilitarian ethic as well, ending suffering not only in this life, but potentially in future lives as well. Finally, we come to the question of animal butchery. Something we often forget in the West is that if we're eating an animal, that means that someone else had to kill it. Now, Buddha, in his wisdom, said that animal butchery was one of the 5 forbidden professions. In other words, the karma associated with killing an animal is so negative that we as Buddhists just should not take part. Now, it's one thing to say we should not take part, but I believe that the second step in that is that we should not cause other people to have to take part in that as well. So if we're going to the grocery store and buying a steak, let's say, that means that some poor person had to kill a cow in order for us to have our steak. And they had to take on all the negative karma associated with that act. So, out of generosity towards them, and also as an act of kindness, not only for the cow, but also for the person who has to kill the cow, we choose to not eat cows. And we avoid that entire cycle of suffering. So, once again, for a third time, we have an example of both virtue and utilitarian ethics. We're cultivating kindness and generosity within ourselves. We're also ending suffering not just for us, but for the animal and the person who would normally be tasked with killing said animal. So for these reasons that I've just went into, we in the Mahayana Buddhist tradition are taught to abstain from eating animals. Now for the question of alcohol. And I want to start off by saying that no one is a bad person or an evil person if they have a glass of wine or a shot of vodka every once in a while. However, we are taught to abstain from alcohol, as seen in the fifth lay precept when we're told to abstain from the abuse of intoxicants, more specifically, intoxicants that cause heedlessness. Why is heedlessness a problem? Because if we lower our inhibitions and become heedless, as which happens when we drink alcohol, we are more likely to act in ways that are not wise. In other words, it's very difficult to keep the first 4 precepts if we don't also keep the 5th one. If we're drunk, we're more likely to make bad decisions. We're more likely to act in a way that is not virtuous. Not to say that this happens every single time, but the fact is, I've never had anyone talk to me and say, I got way too sober last night and I did something I regret. So by refraining from drinking alcohol, we just eliminate a lot of problems from our lives. In addition to that, there's the physical suffering that's involved. We've all had the experience where maybe we had one too many and we had a hangover the next day. So now we ourselves are experiencing the physical suffering that comes with drinking alcohol. In addition to that, the people who have to deal with us in our hungover state have to deal with it as well. Maybe we're so drunk that we're throwing up, so someone has to help us to the bathroom and make sure we're okay, and they have to deal with the smell, or we make a mess and we have to wake up and clean it up the next day and our head hurts. And it's just a lot of drama, a lot of suffering that we can avoid if we just stick to non-alcoholic beverages. So that's the Buddhist teaching both on eating meat and on drinking alcohol. Ideally, we want to avoid both because it accords better with the virtues of Buddhism, which I mentioned earlier: compassion, wisdom, gratitude, kindness, generosity. It also creates the least amount of suffering both for ourselves and for all sentient beings. Amitabha.